Hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Sam Fury Show. This episode is a summary of the book The Art of Thinking Clearly by Rolf Dobelli. The Art of Thinking Clearly by Rolf Dobelli explores common cognitive biases and errors in human decision-making. It offers practical insights and strategies to help readers recognize and overcome these biases, ultimately improving their ability to make clearer and more rational decisions in various aspects of life. Chapter 1. Survivorship Bias. Survivorship bias is the logical error of concentrating on the people or things that made it past some selection process, while overlooking those that did not, often leading to false conclusions. For example, focusing only on successful companies for business lessons while ignoring failed ones can give a skewed view of success factors. To guard against this bias, it's important to look at the entire set of examples, including those that failed. Analyzing both successes and failures provides a more balanced and realistic understanding of what influences outcomes. Chapter 2. Swimmer's Body Illusion. The swimmer's body illusion refers to mistaking a result for a cause, assuming that certain qualities or characteristics inherently lead to specific outcomes. For example, believing that attending a prestigious university inherently makes someone smarter, rather than considering that smarter students might be more likely to get into such universities. To guard against this illusion, critically assess the direction of causality in situations. Consider whether qualities are truly causes of an outcome, or if they might instead be the result of other factors. This helps in forming more accurate judgments and expectations. Chapter 3. Clustering Illusion. The clustering illusion is the tendency to see patterns in random events, leading to incorrect assumptions and conclusions. For example, if a person sees a sequence of coin flips resulting in heads multiple times in a row, they might erroneously believe there's a pattern or trend, despite it being random. To guard against this illusion, remind yourself of the role of randomness in events and resist the urge to find patterns where none exist. Statistical thinking and understanding probability can help in discerning true patterns from random occurrences. Chapter 4. Social Proof. Social proof is the tendency to mimic the actions of others in an attempt to reflect correct behavior for a given situation. For example, if you see many people buying a particular brand of smartphone, you might be inclined to buy the same brand, assuming it's the best choice. To guard against social proof, make decisions based on your own needs and research rather than just following the crowd. Evaluating the actual value and relevance of a choice to your personal situation helps in making more informed and independent decisions. Chapter 5. Sunk Cost Fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy involves continuing a project or investment due to already invested resources, time, money, effort, rather than current value or potential. For example, continuing to fund a failing business because of the amount already invested, rather than cutting losses and moving on to more viable opportunities. To guard against this fallacy, make decisions based on future value and potential, not past investments. Regularly reassessing projects objectively without emotional attachment to past inputs can aid in making more rational choices. Chapter 6. Reciprocity. Reciprocity refers to the human tendency to feel obliged to return favors, gifts, or actions even when unsolicited. For example, if a colleague buys you lunch, you might feel compelled to pay for theirs next time, even if you didn't ask for the initial gesture. To guard against undue influence from reciprocity, be aware of this natural inclination and make conscious decisions based on your genuine willingness and ability to reciprocate rather than feeling obligated to do so. Chapter 7. Confirmation Bias. 1. Confirmation bias 1-inch is the tendency to seek, interpret, and remember information that confirms one's preconceptions, leading to biased thinking. For example, if you believe a particular diet is healthiest, you might only notice and remember studies that support this view, while ignoring contradictory evidence. To guard against this, Actively seek out and consider information that challenges your beliefs. Being open to opposing viewpoints and critically analyzing all evidence can help maintain a more balanced and accurate perspective. Chapter 8. Confirmation. Bias 2. Confirmation bias also involves ignoring information that contradicts existing beliefs. An example of this is seen in political beliefs. For instance, a person who strongly supports a particular political party may consistently ignore or dismiss news reports, studies, or facts that portray their favored party or its policies in a negative light. Despite the availability of this conflicting information, their pre-existing beliefs lead them to focus only on data that supports their political stance, while disregarding any evidence that challenges it. To guard against it, practice open-mindedness, give equal weight to all relevant information, and be willing to adjust beliefs when presented with new, contradictory evidence. Chapter 9. Authority bias. Authority bias is the tendency to attribute greater accuracy to the opinion of an authority figure, regardless of its content. For example, if a famous athlete endorses a health supplement, people may believe it's beneficial solely because of the athlete's endorsement, not based on scientific evidence. To guard against this, evaluate information based on its own merits and evidence, rather than the status of the person endorsing it. Being critical and seeking factual scientific validation helps in making more informed decisions. Chapter 10. Contrast effect. The contrast effect occurs when the evaluation of something is influenced by comparisons with recently encountered different stimuli. For example, after looking at very expensive cars, a moderately priced car might seem surprisingly affordable, even though its price hasn't changed. To guard against this, make decisions based on absolute values and standards, not relative comparisons. Evaluating options in isolation and considering long-term value and relevance helps in avoiding skewed judgments due to contrast. Chapter 11. Availability bias. Availability bias is the tendency to overestimate the importance or likelihood of information that is readily available or recent. For example, after hearing about a plane crash, you might overestimate the risk of flying, even though statistically it's very safe. To guard against this, seek comprehensive, objective data to inform judgments, rather than relying on immediate, emotionally charged, or easily recalled examples. This helps in forming more accurate perceptions based on broader evidence. Chapter 12. It'll get worse. Before it gets better fallacy. The "it'll get worse before it gets better" fallacy is the mistaken belief that a situation must deteriorate further before improving, often leading to unnecessary endurance or suffering. For example, someone may continue an ineffective medical treatment, thinking their condition must worsen before it can get better, despite contrary evidence. To guard against this fallacy, decisions should be based on empirical evidence and expert advice, rather than on this misleading adage. Regularly re-evaluating situations and being open to alternative approaches can help in avoiding unnecessary perseverance in unproductive or harmful scenarios. Chapter 13. Story bias. Story bias is the inclination to understand and make sense of the world through stories, often at the expense of complex realities and facts. For example, a dramatic news story about a rare event might lead you to believe it's common, overshadowing statistical evidence of its rarity. To guard against this, focus on factual data and statistical evidence rather than getting swayed by compelling narratives. Recognizing that stories are often simplified representations of reality helps in maintaining a more accurate and nuanced understanding of the world. Chapter 14. Hindsight bias. Hindsight bias is the tendency to see past events as having been predictable and expected after they have occurred. For example, after a stock market crash, many claim they saw it coming, even though it was not predicted by most experts beforehand. To guard against this, acknowledge the unpredictability of events and the limits of foresight. Keeping a record of your predictions versus actual outcomes can help in recognizing the frequent discrepancy between expectation and reality. Chapter 15. Overconfident bias. Overconfidence bias is the tendency to overestimate one's abilities, leading to unrealistic expectations and risky decisions. For example, a driver might believe they can safely text while driving, overestimating their multitasking skills, which increases the risk of accidents. To guard against this, regularly seek feedback and review outcomes of past decisions. Acknowledging and learning from mistakes helps in maintaining a more realistic assessment of capabilities and risks. Chapter 16. Chauffeur knowledge. Chauffeur knowledge refers to superficial understanding, where a person can talk eloquently on a topic without truly comprehending its depth. For example, a person might use complex financial terms and sound knowledgeable about investing, but lacks deep understanding of financial principles. To guard against this, focus on truly understanding subjects rather than just memorizing facts or jargon. Seeking depth and clarity in knowledge and admitting when you don't know something helps in differentiating real understanding from mere surface knowledge. Chapter 17. Illusion of control. Illusion of control is the tendency to overestimate one's influence over external events, leading to a false sense of control. For example, a gambler might believe that their skill or ritual influences the outcome of a game of chance, despite it being entirely random. To guard against this, recognize the limits of your control and the role of randomness in many situations. Distinguishing between what you can and cannot influence helps in making more realistic decisions and assessments. Chapter 18. Incentive super response tendency. Incentive super response tendency describes how strong incentives can overwhelmingly drive behaviors, sometimes leading to unintended consequences. For example, if a company rewards employees solely for sales volume without considering customer satisfaction, employees might prioritize sales over service quality, leading to short-term gains but long-term customer relationship issues. To guard against this, design incentive systems that are well-balanced and consider a range of desired outcomes. Ensure that incentives align with broader goals and values to avoid narrow, counterproductive behaviors. Chapter 19. Regression to mean. Regression to mean is the statistical phenomenon where extreme cases tend to be followed by more average ones, often misinterpreted as a causal relationship. For example, a sports player has an outstanding performance one week and a mediocre one the next, which is often just a return to average. To guard against misinterpreting this, recognize that extreme performances are often outliers and that a return to average performance is statistically normal. Avoid attributing these changes to luck, skill changes, or other external factors without sufficient evidence. Chapter 20. Outcome bias. Outcome bias is the tendency to judge a decision by its eventual outcome rather than the quality of the decision at the time it was made. For example, praising a risky financial investment that luckily succeeds while ignoring the unsound decision-making behind it. To guard against this, evaluate decisions based on the information and reasoning available at the time rather than their outcomes. This approach encourages better decision-making processes, independent of results. Chapter 21. The Paradox of Choice. The paradox of choice suggests that having too many options can lead to dissatisfaction and indecision, contrary to the belief that more choices increase happiness. For example, feeling overwhelmed and unable to choose when faced with a vast array of toothpaste brands in a supermarket. To guard against this, limit your options to a manageable number by setting clear criteria for what you need. This simplifies decision-making and can increase satisfaction with your choice. Chapter 22. Liking bias. Liking bias is the tendency to agree with or believe people whom we like, often compromising objective judgment. For example, if a friend recommends a product, you might be more inclined to buy it, trusting their judgment more because of your personal relationship. To guard against this, strive to separate personal feelings towards individuals from the objective assessment of their opinions or suggestions. Making decisions based on facts and evidence rather than personal affections helps in maintaining objectivity. Chapter 23. Endowment Effect. The endowment effect is the tendency to overvalue things simply because we own them. For example, you might think a coffee mug you own is worth more than its actual market value simply because it's yours. To guard against this, try to objectively assess the value of your possessions, considering what you would realistically pay for them if you didn't own them. This helps in making more rational decisions about buying and selling items. Chapter 24. Coincidence. Coincidence refers to a remarkable concurrence of events or circumstances without apparent causal connection. For example, if you randomly think of an old friend and then unexpectedly bump into them the same day, it's a coincidence, a chance occurrence without underlying causation. To guard against over-interpreting coincidences, recognize the role of randomness and the high probability of occasional surprising matches in a world full of events. Avoid attributing deep meaning or patterns to these random occurrences. Chapter 25. Groupthink. Groupthink is the phenomenon where the desire for harmony or conformity in a group leads to irrational or dysfunctional decision-making. For example, a team at work might agree to a flawed plan because no one wants to disrupt the consensus or appear disagreeable. To guard against groupthink, encourage open dialogue and dissent in group settings. Cultivating an environment where diverse opinions are valued and critical evaluation is welcomed can help in making more balanced and effective decisions. Chapter 26. Neglect of probability. Neglect of probability is the tendency to disregard or undervalue the likelihood of events, often leading to poor decision-making. For example, worrying excessively about plane crashes, a very rare event, while ignoring everyday risks like car accidents. To guard against this, actively consider and weigh the actual probabilities of different events. Educating oneself about statistical likelihoods can help in making more rational decisions and assessments. Chapter 27. Scarcity error. Scarcity error refers to the tendency to value things more highly when they are perceived as rare or in short supply. For example, you might rush to buy a product due to a limited time offer, fearing you'll miss out, even if you don't need it. To guard against this, question the true value and necessity of items beyond their scarcity. Consider if your desire is driven by actual need or just the fear of missing out. This helps in making more thoughtful and rational purchasing decisions. Chapter 28. Base rate neglect. Base rate neglect is the tendency to ignore general information, base rates, in favor of specifics, leading to distorted judgment. For example, overestimating the likelihood of winning the lottery based on stories of winners, while ignoring the much larger number of participants who don't win. To guard against this, consciously integrate broader base rate information into your decision-making process. This broader perspective helps in forming more accurate assessments and expectations. Chapter 29. Gambler's Fallacy. Gambler's fallacy is the mistaken belief that past random events affect the likelihood of future ones in independent situations. For example, thinking a coin is due to land on heads after several tails in a row, despite each flip being independent and having equal chances. To guard against this, remember that in independent random events like coin flips or lottery draws, each event is unaffected by previous outcomes. Understanding the nature of probability and randomness helps in making more rational predictions and decisions. Chapter 30. The anchor. The anchor refers to the human tendency to rely heavily on the first piece of information, the anchor, when making decisions. For example, if a seller prices an item at $100 and then offers it for $50, you might perceive it as a bargain, influenced by the initial higher price. To guard against this, consciously question initial information and compare it with other data points. Researching and considering multiple perspectives helps in making decisions less influenced by anchoring biases. Chapter 31. Induction. Induction is the process of making generalizations based on specific observations, which can lead to incorrect conclusions if the observations are not representative. For example, if all swans you've seen are white, you might conclude all swans are white, which is disproved by the existence of black swans. To guard against the pitfalls of induction, recognize that observations may not represent the whole picture. Seek out additional information and be open to revising beliefs when new, contradictory evidence is presented. Chapter 32. Loss aversion. Loss aversion refers to the psychological phenomenon where people prefer avoiding losses to acquiring equivalent gains. This means the pain of losing is psychologically about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining. For example, a person might refuse to sell a stock at a loss, even though holding on to it might lead to greater losses. This is because the immediate pain of realizing a loss feels more significant than potential future losses. To guard against loss aversion, one can practice viewing decisions in terms of potential gains and losses, emphasizing long-term benefits over short-term emotional reactions. It's also helpful to establish preset rules for decision-making to reduce emotional bias. Chapter 33. Social loafing. Social loafing is the tendency of individuals to exert less effort when working in a group than when working alone. For example, in a group project, a member might contribute less, assuming others will pick up the slack, leading to an overall decrease in group productivity. To guard against social loafing, it's effective to assign clear individual responsibilities within a group and ensure each member's contributions are visible and acknowledged. This creates accountability and motivates everyone to participate actively. Chapter 34. Exponential growth. Exponential growth refers to a process where the quantity increases at a rate proportional to its current value, leading to rapid escalation over time. For example, if a population of rabbits doubles every year, starting from just 2, it exponentially grows to 4, 8, 16, 32, and so on each year. To guard against the pitfalls of underestimating exponential growth, it's important to understand its nature and anticipate its rapid escalation. Regular reassessment and long-term planning are key in contexts where exponential growth occurs, like investments or population studies. Chapter 35. Winner's Curse. The winner's curse describes a situation where the winner of an auction ends up overpaying or suffering a loss due to the competitive nature of the bidding process. For example, in a real estate auction, a bidder might win a property by significantly outbidding others, only to find the property's actual value is much lower than their bid. To guard against the winner's curse, it's crucial to set a maximum bid based on thorough research and stick to it, avoiding getting caught up in the heat of the moment. This disciplined approach helps in making rational decisions based on value, not competition. Chapter 36. Fundamental attribution error. The fundamental attribution error is the tendency to overemphasize personal characteristics and ignore situational factors when judging others' behavior. For example, if someone is late to a meeting, you might think they are irresponsible, disregarding possible external factors like traffic or an emergency that caused their delay. To guard against this error, it's important to consider external circumstances affecting people's actions. Being empathetic and open-minded about the various factors that can influence behavior helps in making more accurate and fair assessments of others. Chapter 37. False causality. False causality refers to the incorrect assumption that a relationship between two events implies that one causes the other. For example, if a person wears their lucky shirt when their favorite team wins, they might believe the shirt causes the victory, despite no real causal link. To guard against false causality, one should critically evaluate evidence and look for alternative explanations. Relying on scientific methods and statistical analysis helps discern true cause and effect relationships from mere coincidences. Chapter 38. Halo Effect. The halo effect is the tendency to let one admirable trait of a person positively influence one's overall impression of them. For example, if a public figure is exceptionally attractive, people might also perceive them as more intelligent or trustworthy, despite no actual correlation. To guard against the halo effect, it's crucial to consciously separate individual traits and judge each on its own merit. One should actively question initial impressions and seek objective evidence before forming overall judgments about people or things. Chapter 39. Alternative Paths. Alternative paths refers to the idea that different approaches or methods can lead to the same outcome or goal. For example, achieving success in a career can be done through various means: academic excellence, networking, innovation, or a unique combination of skills and opportunities. To effectively navigate through alternative paths, it's important to remain flexible and open-minded, recognizing that there is no single right way to achieve a goal. Embracing diverse strategies and adapting to changing circumstances can optimize the journey towards desired outcomes. Chapter 40. Forecast Illusion. The forecast illusion is the tendency to overestimate the accuracy of predictions or forecasts, often ignoring uncertainty and randomness. For example, an investor might trust a financial expert's market predictions as certain, leading to risky investments based on these forecasts, despite the inherent unpredictability of financial markets. To guard against the forecast illusion, it's essential to maintain skepticism towards predictions, understand the limits of forecasting, and consider a range of possible outcomes. Diversifying decisions and preparing for various scenarios can mitigate the risk of relying too heavily on uncertain forecasts. Chapter 41. Forecast Illusion. The forecast illusion is the overconfidence in and over-reliance on the accuracy of forecasts, especially in complex, uncertain situations. For example, a weather forecast predicts a sunny day, leading a family to plan an outdoor picnic. However, the day turns out to be rainy, disrupting their plans. This shows the unpredictability and limitations of forecasts. To guard against the forecast illusion, acknowledge the inherent uncertainties in predictions. Diversify decision-making strategies by considering multiple scenarios and avoid basing important decisions solely on forecasts. Adaptability and flexibility in planning are key to mitigating the risks associated with reliance on predictions. Chapter 42. Framing. Framing is the influence of presentation or context on how information is perceived and decisions are made. The same information can lead to different conclusions based on how it's framed or presented. For example, describing a glass as half full versus half empty influences people's perception of the situation, with half full suggesting optimism and half empty suggesting pessimism, despite describing the same reality. To guard against framing effects, be aware of how information is presented and consciously consider alternative framings. Seek objective data and multiple perspectives to ensure decisions are based on substance rather than presentation. Chapter 43. Action Bias. Action bias is the preference for action over inaction, often driven by the desire to control events or situations. For example, a football goalkeeper might dive to one side during a penalty kick, even though statistically staying in the center often yields better results. This action is driven by the feeling that doing something is better than doing nothing. To guard against action bias, pause to evaluate the effectiveness of potential actions versus inaction. Consider the benefits and drawbacks of both, and make decisions based on rational analysis rather than the impulse to simply do something. Chapter 44. Omission Bias. Omission bias is the tendency to favour inaction over action, especially when the latter leads to negative outcomes, even if the inaction has a similar or worse result. For example, a person might avoid vaccinating their child due to fear of side effects, despite the greater risk of serious illness from not vaccinating. To guard against omission bias, evaluate actions and inactions on equal footing, considering their potential outcomes. Make decisions based on rational assessment of risks and benefits, rather than irrational fears or misconceptions about taking action. Chapter 45. Self-serving bias. Self-serving bias is attributing success to personal factors while blaming external factors for failures. For example, a student who gets a good grade might credit their intelligence and hard work, but blame the teacher or bad luck for a poor grade, despite similar effort levels in both instances. To guard against this bias, practice self-awareness and humility, recognizing both internal and external factors in successes and failures. Reflect objectively on your actions and their outcomes, fostering a balanced view of personal responsibility. Chapter 46. Hedonic treadmill. The hedonic treadmill is the tendency to quickly return to a baseline level of happiness, regardless of major positive or negative events. For example, a person might feel a surge of happiness after getting a promotion, but soon returns to their usual level of contentment despite the improved circumstances. To guard against the hedonic treadmill, focus on long-term fulfillment rather than short-term pleasures. Cultivate gratitude, mindfulness, and find joy in everyday experiences rather than constantly seeking external sources of happiness. This helps maintain a more stable, enduring sense of well-being. Chapter 47. Self-selection bias. Self-selection bias is the distortion in results when participants in a study or situation are not randomly chosen, but select themselves. For example, a survey conducted on a fitness website about exercise habits might show high activity levels, but this reflects the website's audience, not the general population. To guard against self-selection bias, ensure diverse and random sampling in studies and evaluations. Be cautious in interpreting results from non-random samples, considering the potential biases introduced by the nature of the sample selection. Chapter 48. Association bias. Association bias is the tendency to connect events or concepts based on familiarity or a perceived relationship, even when no such link exists. For example, assuming a person is kind because they have a friendly face illustrates association bias, as appearance and personality are not necessarily related. To guard against this bias, question intuitive connections and seek factual evidence for any assumed associations. Practice critical thinking and avoid making judgments based solely on superficial or unrelated traits. Chapter 49. Beginner's luck. Beginner's luck refers to an inexperienced person unusually succeeding in their initial attempt at a task, often attributed to chance rather than skill. For example, a person playing a card game for the first time might win against experienced players, being perceived as having beginner's luck. To guard against overvaluing beginner's luck, recognize the role of chance in initial successes and maintain realistic expectations for future performance. Focus on skill development rather than relying on luck to repeat. Chapter 50. Cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the mental discomfort experienced when holding contradictory beliefs or when behavior conflicts with beliefs. For example, a person who values health but smokes may experience cognitive dissonance, as their action, smoking, conflicts with their belief, valuing health. To guard against cognitive dissonance, strive for consistency in beliefs and actions. When confronted with dissonance, objectively evaluate your beliefs and behaviors, and be willing to adjust either to align them more closely. This can involve changing habits or re-examining and modifying beliefs. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Sam Fury Show. If you found this episode useful, let me know with a like, follow, and share. Also, if you haven't already, be sure to visit samfury.com and join my free newsletter. As a subscriber, you'll receive no more than one email a week containing a roundup of my latest posts, as well as exclusive content which is only for my mailing list. It's completely free to join at samfury.com.